Good morning. My name is Ned Gravel, and I'm the Training Manager for the International Accreditation Service, IAS. Today we're delivering the first ELAP TNI webinar. We are located in Brea, California. I've been providing accreditation since 1975. Just so you know, I spent 10 years as the Quality Manager for the Canadian version of TNI, the public and private lab partnership located in Ottawa for the accreditation of environmental laboratories. However, I'm only a civil engineer, and today you're going to be talking to a real expert in the environmental testing world, Dr. Tony Francis. Tony is helping IAS deliver training to labs who seek IAS accreditation as one of the TNI recognized non-governmental accreditation bodies which are listed on the TNI website. It is our belief that, like many other accreditation programs, we are there to help regulators protect the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens covered by NELAC. As we operate from California, this is our first webinar on this subject, aimed at California environmental laboratories. We will be conducting more webinars on the TNI and ELAP requirements, and we will be sending surveys and questionnaires to help determine what you need from this training format. So please keep a lookout for these e-blasts. Alternatively, you may also write to our Customer Success Group and Duncan Miller, whose credentials are listed on the last slide, and they can give you any clarification on the program or the application process. Dr. Tony Francis has extensive experience in chemistry and biology and received his PhD in chemistry from the University of Utah. He is currently a principal with SAW Environmental and the owner-operator of a large environmental laboratory in Nevada. Prior to becoming a full-time consultant, he performs and manages the following: third-party laboratory audits for several states, QA/QC consulting to individual laboratories, and he provides internal audits, data integrity training, and data validation to private and governmental laboratories. Dr. Francis is a contract assessor for IAS and has assessed laboratories to ISO IEC 17025 in the US and abroad. He performs 30 to 40 audits per year for various TNI standards and is a qualified NELAC assessor in organic and inorganic chemistry, microbiology, cryptosporidium, radiochemistry, solids, aqueous tissue, and air. Finally, he's an EPA-approved drinking water certification officer in all areas available. This webinar was recorded, but we didn't start recording until after the first slide. So let's join the webinar in progress.
From that experience, since I've sold my laboratory a little over 10 years ago, got into consulting. Like Ned said, we do a mix of quality assurance, quality control for local laboratories to prepare them for audits. And then we also do third-party assessments for various states and other agencies. I'll talk a little. Throughout this presentation, I will be giving examples of my assessment experience in terms of common findings and how it attributes and how it's affected by the new standard. Kind of give laboratories kind of a heads up on the hotspots. The participants, you guys today, are a lot of labs. I see Jacob's here from LAB, which is great. I'd love for his, if he has any questions or input, that'd be great to hear as well. It's tailored to laboratories to get them from where they're at to where they need to be with the 2016 standard going to effect shortly. Today we'll be talking about the current status of California ELAP. It's been a process. I'm sure all of you are aware of history, where they've been, where they are, where they're going to go. And then we'll just talk about an overview of the standard. The standard is specific, is complex in areas, and this is just an overview. Like Ned said, future modules will be coming out. We'll get into the weeds at that point in terms of particulars. The 2016 standard, and then we're going to overview the transition process. As you know, management systems are hard to maintain when they're running smoothly. There's always things that come up, things to be fixed, and trying to transition to a new standard is another layer of complication. It doesn't have to be. There's a certain process we can do, and it'll be helpful to discuss the process of how that's going to go. What we expect to learn from this. Again, learn the current ELAP landscape, understand the standard, and know the basics to fully implement the quality management system for your laboratory. And I'll be mentioning different types of laboratories. Of course, there's in-house captive labs for reclamation plants. There's full service commercial labs. There's hybrids. There's some from health departments, that do just coliform testing. There's a wide range of laboratories. The standard is written in a way that covers all of them. And we'll get into the differences and how it applies to different types of laboratories. This is taken from the California Water Board's website, just showing you where the process is at right now in terms of ELAP. It's been a multi-year process from starting out just what standard are we going to use. It's been chosen. There's been regulations drafted. Stakeholder workshops have occurred, and I want to talk about stakeholders for a minute. I know, because I used to be a laboratory person, it feels like sometimes that regulations and standards are written by people not in the laboratory, and then they're thrust upon the lab and said, you need to do this. In reality, that's not the case. Stakeholder workshops by each program and also the TNI conference, they actually do take into account a lot of feedback from laboratories, consultants, accreditation bodies, program managers. And if you've attended one of these conferences, which I would highly recommend, it's very informative, you can hear the discussion, you can hear the input. Things are not put into the standard that laboratories protest against if they're valid and they're a big deal. I'm also on the TNI committee for quality systems and also the chemistry expert committee. So I've seen real time these discussions happening, and we like to think that laboratories do have a say and they are represented. And I feel that's kind of the goal, is to make sure everyone is on board, because even ABs need to adhere to the standard as well. So everyone has a stake, everyone has their voices heard, and this is what we have. So TNI, which Ned talked about before, the little history of it, I provided a read-only version of the 2016 standard. This is actually really nice, since laboratories are told to adhere to this upcoming standard, they should be able to access it. And so the TNI has offered this to laboratories. If you want to jot this down or take a screenshot, this is the website you go to, type in that password, and you'll be given a read-only copy. I assume most of you have this, I hope. I hope you've already reviewed it, maybe started to implement some of these changes. It's a proprietary document, so this is read-only. Once you see it and look into it, you need to purchase your own, and this is something labs have to have. It's part of the document control, external documents. You have to have normative documents, regulations, and 2016 standard is one of those things that you have to have in the lab, accessible to assessors when they come in. So you'd be surprised when I go to assess labs and look at their document control, it's not on there, and say, oh, where's the standard? And they don't have a copy. Have to have it. So definitely take that, look at it if you haven't already. So written comment is over in terms of the ELAP process of getting this standard in place. That in February, there was a hearing set for March 17th. And of course, since this COVID-19 emergency, that has been canceled. I have not heard of a rescheduled date. Anybody has, let me know. But let's see. Yeah, so I haven't heard anything yet. I'm sure ELAP will notify everyone when that gets rescheduled.
Patrick, good morning. This is Jacob Oaxaca.
Hi, Jacob.
Yeah, just a quick update on that. I can see somebody here in the chat section did see the Lyris message that California ELAP sent out earlier today. And so, yeah, the meeting is not canceled, but the adoption hearing was not canceled, but postponed. And we've now been put on the agenda for May 5th.
There we go. All right, let's see what we're doing here.
And just a reminder for all those that are on the line, this will be a remote meeting, a teleconference meeting. very different setup than an in-person meeting, but there's a lot of information that the water board has provided on how to participate in the remote call-in meeting.
It's a remote call meeting on May 5th.
Correct.
Great. All right, is this working for everybody? They can see my current screen. Update. Perfect. I was going to go back a few. Let's see. Okay, so you didn't miss a whole lot. Update real quick. Outline purpose. Just went over the outcomes. And here we are. So hopefully we're all on board and we're up to date now. I think so. Perfect. We will continue unless I hear otherwise. Okay, so current regulations for ELAP have not been updated in a big way since 1994. They were outdated. One of the major things we were missing were lack of quality systems and continuous improvement. The 2016-2019 I standards are based upon 17025, which has a high priority on continuous improvement, risk assessment, quality systems, and it was a big change from the 2003-2009 TNI standard. Talk about the current state of these standards in a minute. But California wanted to update the accreditation standard for these purposes. So the goal of any laboratory and any program managing laboratories is to provide data of known, consistent, and documented quality. This is it's one of my soapbox things, but of known data, of known quality. There are certain labs, which we're all aware of, that for example, some of my clients, they are a captive lab of let's say, a reclamation facility. And they're being funded by the plant, and their goal is to provide data of lower quality. It takes a lot of resources, time, money to make high quality data, and they're aware of that. When batches fail for some reason, if recoveries are low, the lab will qualify it, they'll have narrative, and they give it to the client, and that's okay for them. They accept the data anyway, but the point is the client knows the quality of the data. There's this philosophy or theory that all data must be the highest quality possible. That's not reality, first of all, but also it's not necessarily desired. And it's up to you and your clients to decide what level of data is wanted. And that's the goal of the standard. From what I can understand, these regulations with ELAP are expected to pass. I have not heard of any major obstacles. We're kind of the last steps to get it through. And like Jacob said, join on May 5th, call in, hear the current status, see what's going to happen. But from what we understand, it should pass, no problem. California's not been in ELAP AB since 2014. Speculation, one step closer, maybe not. But the standard will be implemented, most likely. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to get your laboratory up to the 2016 TNI standard to make sure your laboratory is compliant with California ELAP. As a side note, this got put out by TNI recently, about 10 days ago. California's Proposition 65, they mentioned laboratories accredited under NELAP to be used for Consumer Product Safety Commission tests. And TNI want to make it clear that TNI standard is written for environmental laboratories, water, soil, air, asbestos, things like this, and not for product safety. They just want to make that clear because it's inside a section in this proposition. They want to make it clear that TNI accredited labs are not to be used for those purposes. That's just a recent update. So accreditation requirements. We're going to talk about general 2016 standard overview. These are consensus standards. The 2009 and 2016 standards are based upon ISO IEC 17025 2005 version. There is a 2017 version out and being accredited to. There's been some fairly major changes between the two. TNI has not adopted the base document into their standard yet. Like I said, I'm on the quality management system committee, and TNI is figuring out how to make the new standard, whenever that comes, to be based on the 2017 version. And that'll be helpful for laboratories that have both accreditations, 17025 and TNI, and maybe also DoD and others. It's helpful when the base standard is the same as the ISO standard, and that is in the works. There's no time frame on that. It takes several years to get a standard passed, since they are consensus standards. And again, all stakeholders have input. So if you want to make your voice heard, go to the conferences, go to the meetings, join a committee. No one group can say what's in the standard, and that's the good news. Currently 14-member TNI states. Cover's not one of them yet. Other states do adopt TNI standards. It is not make them a TNI state. What TNI offers is reciprocity. If you are TNI accredited, you have reciprocity with other states. In states like California, where a lot of laboratories do a lot of national work, it is a benefit for sure. Standards are recognized for ensuring again, production of known and documented data. We'll talk about documented data. The ISO 17025 standard sort of interchangeably uses the words documented versus recorded. It means they're two separate things. Little pet peeve I have, we'll get into a little bit later. Basically saying the data must be of known quality and you have to have records of it, right? You have to have documents showing how we got the data and then records of the data itself to show how it was made. And those are two kind of different things. So the TNI standard has several volumes. Volume 1 is about laboratory requirements. This is the volume that labs must adhere to. Volume 2 is for accreditation bodies, and there's some for proficiency testing providers and so forth. We're focusing on Volume 1, since this is the one that is tied to your laboratory operations and the requirements you have to adhere to. And in Volume 1, there's different modules. Module 1 is about proficiency testing. This one will go into effect immediately upon adoption of the 2016 standard by California. There was talks of doing a rollout between Module 2s and 7. Jacob, I don't even speak to that. If that's changed, if it's all going to be put in at once, or if it's still going to be like a slow rollout, I'm not sure the current status of that. Jacob wants to chime in, he can, but that's my understanding. Yeah.
Maybe after you go through your presentation, if we can touch on any other kind of those questions. I'm not sure. I almost didn't catch the question, so I don't know if
Sorry, the question
was. You can repeat it now, or.
Yeah. So the question was, from a while ago, it was thought that the Module 1 would go into effect immediately upon acceptance by California, and then Modules 2 through 7 will have a rollout period. I don't know if that's still the case.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Perfect. So yeah, so Modules 2 through 7 will be a rollout. Again, these will be made more clear once ELAP has regulations in place, and they will notify laboratories on the timeframes for that. So Module 1 is for all labs except for air labs. Air labs are a little different in that they don't have PTs per se. What air labs do is they do a round robin type testing. They get samples from EPA or another provider, and multiple air labs will run them and report the results, and they share the data to kind of see how they stack up against each other. It's not required. It's more of a quality system they put in place to just kind of get a sense of how well they're doing. But PTs are required for all other labs. The California exception is they have 1 round of PTs per year. Most, all TNI states require 2. Some other states require 1 or 2 as well. So 1 round of PTs per year. I don't know the history of how that came to be. I don't know if it was laboratories or the ELAP itself. But that was one exception they wanted in their regulations, was that just have 1 per year. My personal take is I like PTs. You could have a good quality system in place. You could be passing your batch. Your recoveries are okay. Your standards are good. PTs are the one thing. It's like an outside test of just in general, how is your whole process working? From sample receiving all the way through analysis to reporting, make sure it's okay, everything's working well. So I like PTs. They are burdensome for labs, I understand. They cost money. And then when things go wrong, it's more work to do with corrective actions and whatnot. But I do like PT. It does give clients and regulatory agencies an idea of how well the lab is doing as a whole. Also, for California, you must submit acceptable PTs with the application. So most of these labs have been up and running for years, and it's not an issue. You've been running them anyway. New laboratories, you have to have everything in place before you apply. California won't accept it without in hand with the application. Module 2. This applies to all labs. It contains the quality system and technical requirements. And Module 2 is when people talk about the standard, like, oh, is that in the standard? They're generally referring to Module 2. This is where most of the meat of the regulations are. And we'll go a little more in depth into Module 2 in a minute. 3 through 7 depends on your scope of accreditation. A lot of labs just do E. coli testing, for instance. They just worry about Module 5 in addition to 1 and 2. Most labs are a mix of 4 and 5, and then specialty labs that just do asbestos testing. Some are specialty radiochemical testing, and of course, whole effluent toxicity testing is its own beast as well. So depending on what your lab is, these modules will apply to your laboratory. Let's talk about Volume 1, Module 2. So again, an overview of the 2016 standard and the way it's organized. Again, it's based on ISO 7025, 2005 standard. Sections 1, 2, and 3 are more introductions and terms and definitions, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We talk about Module 1? Yes, we did. Let's see. Perfect. Okay. Any questions I missed? Let me check real quick. I hope I mentioned Module 1. Okay, if not, let me know. I can, if you have specific questions, I'll take a look and let you know. Okay. Section 4, 4.1, 2, and 3 is all about communications between the staff and management. Oh, I see. How is Module 1 different from the current standard? There are changes to Module 1, not as many as Module 2. I just wanted to point out the difference between the current 2016 standard, 2 PTs per year, versus California's exception of 1 per year. There are other changes to Module 1. Let's go back there for a second. Other changes to Module 1 would be the way PTs are reported. That has changed. They now they've reintroduced the PTRL, proficiency testing reporting limit. That's going back into effect. The way they're handled, PTs are handled, has changed. And as far as the details go, we will have a future module when we get, like I said, go into the weeds of each one, and we'll go through it more specifically of the actual changes in the 2016 standard. So that's more of a broad explanation of the differences. Again, another module will come out shortly. We'll get into the details of what the changes actually are. I hope that's okay in a nutshell. All right, thanks for the question, by the way. So 4.1 to 4.3, internal communication between staff and management. Organization, this goes into, is your laboratory, who is legally responsible, who owns it? Because when things go sideways, there has to be someone to be responsible at the end of the day. And this can get into legal issues, if there's fraud occurring. They point to 4.1 and talk about who is responsible for the generation of that data. Management. This goes into who has what authorities. Is there a quality manager, technical manager, how it's organized, and the flow of work. Document control. This is a big one. A lot of findings come from 4.3. One of the biggest ones I find are the distribution, for instance. And what I like about the standard is that it's vague enough. I know a lot of labs are like, just tell me what to do. Like, just spell it out and I'll do it. But each lab is different, right? So you have commercial labs, municipal labs, etc. And they have different ways of doing things. Some labs, their document control is literally a piece of paper. It's handwritten on what documents they have, the current revision status, the effective date, and some have spreadsheets, just an Excel spreadsheet. Some have it in their LIMS in terms of document control, and it just depends on what works for your lab. But some of the biggest findings are having that not up to date. That happens a lot when I look at their master document list and it's old, there's been new revisions, and hasn't been updated. That's a big one. Another one is distribution. So part of document control is, for instance, how many copies of the quality manual exist and where are they? When the quality manual gets updated, you must go out and get back all of the old ones and put in the new ones. And that has to be written down and recorded somewhere. I know a lot of technicians like to have their favorite SOP, and they do a lot of notes on it and handwritten things. And then when the quality manager shows up to take it back, they're like, "Oh, it's not my favorite notes," and they want to hide it and keep it themselves. But when SOPs get updated, everyone must be on board and follow what it says. So document control is a big area. This section refers to communication between clients and suppliers. Requests, tenders, and contracts, that again varies lab by lab. Some labs that are captive in-house is very straightforward. They have one client, and that is their drinking water plant or their wastewater plant. Commercial labs gets kind of, it's a bigger deal. You have some contracts in place, you have some just on a routine basis, and some walk-ins. And all that must be spelled out in the quality manual or SOP. So that is an area that is overlooked somewhat. I see SOPs written 10 years ago, and the business has changed a lot and has not been updated. For 4.5, 4.6, the ISO 17025 2017 version has combined those just into suppliers. That makes sense to me because you're both purchasing either services or items. Some that could be subcontracting. It all should be under the same umbrella. Again, SOPs must be up to date. A lot of times, actual laboratory practice is fine. They're doing things well. It's just not running the SOP. So make sure that is there as well. 4.7, service to client. The biggest item in there would be feedback from clients. And labs always say, hey, we accept feedback all the time. But the standard says you must solicit feedback. You must ask for it. There's various ways to do that. Some do surveys, which are optimal, not required. Surveys are good. Labs are kind of cumbersome. It's kind of a lot of work to send out surveys. And of course, you don't get very many back, so it seems kind of worthless. But to me, actual surveys are the best way to get a pulse on what your clients are wanting, what they appreciate, what they don't like. And some labs have taken that feedback and the good things they see their lab doing, it's a marketing a place, oh, I didn't realize we're so good at this, this item, and they can exploit that. And so they're very helpful for sure. Other ways are just phone calls if you record it. Emails are good. Some labs just put on a little signature line on their email saying, how are we doing? Let us know with a link. That works as well. But the biggest finding there is not asking for the feedback. Complaints. This is another area where when I do my audits, I say, let's talk about complaints. And they say, oh, we don't have any, right? People think, oh, no complaints. And complaint, the word has some negative connotations. All it's saying is clients or vendors or staff, because it covers everybody, right? Not people think of just client complaints. It doesn't have to be. It can be staff complaints, management complaints, vendor complaints. But there should be some process in place with an SOP or in the quality manual explaining how complaints are handled. And the big item here is to make sure they are recorded and they are dealt with. Do they have merit? Yes or no? If they do have merit, what do we do? And then a lot of this should go into corrective action if it's a bigger problem. If it's not a big problem, you record it and you move on. Control of non-conforming work. So again, module 2 is about quality system and technical issues. This kind of gets into technical in terms of corrective actions, things like that. My philosophy is that of your SOP is written, let's talk about a technical method. Your SOP is written to allow the method to be run. Whenever you get some batch results, that let's say your CCV fails. You go to your SOP and it says, if this fails, do A, B, and C. And you follow the SOP until you can't follow it anymore. So if the SOP says rerun the ICV once, and you run it once and it fails again, to me, that's now moved on to non-conforming work. If it's within the SOP and you follow that and data's qualified or whatever it says, that's fine. It's when the SOP comes to dead end, then becomes a corrective action, because now there's a bigger problem, right? That's kind of my theory of how that process should look like. 410 to 413, this is lab operations. Improvement's a big one. Again, with the new standards coming out, there's more emphasis on continual improvement, on corrective actions. You know, how is your laboratory's process working to become better over time? That's the goal of ABs, of laboratories, clients, everybody. And improvement and preventative actions are two areas that are often forgotten about. The factor on this webinar right now is a preventative action item. So I hope a lot of these laboratories can record this training, write it up as a preventative action, have it on record. Because you're not here because something went wrong, you're here to make yourself better. And things like this are great opportunities to record it, keep it in your files, so your next assessment, you can say, yes, we do preventative actions, here they are. Over half the labs I assess have 0 preventative actions on record, which isn't reality. I know lab management is always trying to improve things, and they actually do things that are helpful. I would say just record it, write it down. Was it a training? Was it a seminar? Was it a conference? An idea, should we update our software? Should we update our LIMS? Those are all preventative actions that are great. And when they're recorded and they're followed, they actually get done. Corrective actions, this is becoming a bigger and bigger deal for most of the ABs that I know. Corrective actions are to help the laboratory. I know a lot of people think of them as punitive or negative, like, oh, we're doing a bad job, but we have a lot of corrective actions. My experience is the opposite. When I assess a lab and they have very few or no corrective actions, it's a sign the laboratory is not working well. If I go to labs and they have whole binders full, I'm like, whoa, you guys are on top of it for sure. And there's extremes. There's extreme to 0, extreme overboard. Every little thing's corrective action. Every lab's different. Your operations better than anybody, but corrective actions are there to improve the laboratory. It's a record. It keeps you on track. Monitoring of them helps you. So they're not bad. I would, ABs want, the philosophy is the laboratory has a system in place and it's working. And they do assessments to just confirm that it's working. And so if I'm doing an assessment and I find something, let's say a balance hasn't been calibrated in a while, and the lab says, oh, we found that, we did corrective action and we're fixing it. Then I'm like, perfect, right? Your process working. That's not a finding for me, because even though I found a problem, you guys found it first and you're fixing it, and that's perfect. So that's the philosophy. Corrective action, the more corrective actions you have, the less findings you probably should have in the future, is the general rule. Control of records. This means things from data generation, logbooks, worksheets. How are they kept? Where are they kept? Is your process to scan everything? Is it to keep hard copies? Etc. And again, just make sure actual lab practice follows what's in your SOP. And right now, the standard says records must be kept for 5 years. If you work for a city or someone else, they might have, might go beyond that. But 5 years, and it's actually 5 years from the last date of use. Okay? So if you have a standard you bought 5 years ago, you're still using it, then you must have that record still. I know a lot of gas labs, their standards last a long time. Or things like DOCs, right? If you have an initial DOC of an analyst and they've been with you for 15 years, that initial DOC is still a current record, and so you can get rid of it. Just a little side note, it's from 5 years from the date of last use. Just a heads up. Last section in section 4 of module 2, internal audits, management reviews, data integrity investigations. These are all how to make our system better, right? Internal audits. This has changed a little bit in 2016 standard, and future modules will go into this. What the standard says is a lab must audit its activities. It doesn't necessarily every year, right? For all methods, definitely every year for quality system. But if you're running a lot of methods, I know a lot of labs, it's just too much to do. If their scope is 36 pages and they have 57 methods, It's too much work to audit every method every year. And so what they do in their quality manual or the SOP is they say, we will assess one method from each technology per year, or we will assess 3 technologies per quarter, or whatever they say. As long as you're following it and it makes sense and it's technically justified, then you're okay. Internal audits, again, laboratories that do well actually put effort into internal audits because that means they're on top of it. They know what's wrong. They're fixing it. Labs that think of internal audits as a necessary evil, they just get to when they can. They have a quick checklist. They're not making themselves better. And that's made evident in the results of the audit. Management reviews, these, again, very beneficial. I know some write them up because they have to. Laboratories that look forward to it, have a plan in place, have all the key players involved, are definitely better. To talk about these two things a little, I know they kind of get merged into one sometimes. You'll start on internal audit and it kind of morphs into a management review. The way I like to think about it is internal audits, what you're doing is you're looking to see if you're following what you said you're going to do. That's all it is. You get an SOP, look at what's actually done, do they match? So internal audits are just, are we doing what we say we're doing? Management reviews are different. Is what we're saying we're doing okay? Should we change what we're doing? So we think about auditing a method, you do an internal audit of a method, and you realize, oh, this SOP should be changed. Well, now you're talking about management review. Okay, so a management review is where we are reviewing SOPs, reviewing the quality manual, looking at the types of samples we have. You're looking at corrective actions from a big picture. You're looking at how staff changed over time. So these kind of get morphed into one. I would say try hard to keep them separate. Your laboratory will benefit for sure. And then 416, data integrity investigations. This is just saying, when things come up, data integrity issues, are they held in confidentiality? Are they being recorded? Are the results being dealt with? Okay. Section 5, this is more the technical area. So Section 4 is more of the quality system. Section 5 is more technical. So 5.2 personnel, California. For those of you who have gone to TNI conferences or been involved in the committees or have heard meetings, the requirements for technical manager is a hotly debated item. It is messy, to be honest. In fact, right now on both the chemistry expert committee and on the quality systems committee, we're both committees trying to figure out what to put in for the requirements technical manager. In California, it used to be called the laboratory director. That's going to be changed to technical manager, and the requirements are a little different for California. Look at the regulations to see what they are. But again, this is a hot button item. At the end of the day, I'm not sure everyone's going to be happy, but we can all agree on the foundation of that is technical managers have to have some sort of experience and education required to do that job. Not anybody can be technical manager. So there has to be some sort of minimum requirements, and that's what we're working on. What are the minimum requirements? I know some technical managers who have been, they've been in that job for 20, 30 years. They might have an associate's from, the 70s, but they're excellent. They're an excellent technical manager, and that should be allowed, right? And there's a lot of grandfathering in, which happens, but things like that do matter. Question: can we have an ELAP certified lab with a technical manager? No, you cannot. It's one of the requirements in the standard and also in ELAP regulations. You have to have a technical manager. If there's a small laboratory that has a difficult time finding someone on staff with those minimum requirements, first things first, I would just contact ELAP or your AB, figure out what to do. I know of a couple small labs that actually share a technical manager. It's allowed as long as ELAP or TNI or the AB is notified, and to make sure that their presence in person or remotely is sufficient to actually do the job correctly. Another good question. Can you have several technical managers? Yes. A lot of labs have a main technical managers, or they'll just name, 4. One might be the main one. And the standard says if the technical manager is gone for more than 15 days, you must have a deputy in place. California used to have an allowance for technical manager with less qualifications to fill in the absence. That is going away. So all technical managers must have the same minimum credential and experience. That's new. So if you're a big enough lab and you have enough personnel that can qualify as technical managers, I recommend having everyone be listed as technical manager who qualifies. That just helps management when things change, people leave, whether permanently or for an extended period of time, then it goes by smoothly and it's fine. So I would recommend that for sure. Question, what is the definition of a small lab? That's a great question. And that question comes up every conference, you know, what is a big lab? What is a small lab? And there's no good answer. From experience, there are labs that, you know, have 40 plus analysts. And I know some labs who are literally a one-person lab. You know, they are the sampler, the sample receiver, the analyst, the reviewer, they write the reports, they're the quality manager, they're everything. Difficult to do, but it's possible. Small labs to me, I mean, from speaking just very broadly, a small lab to me would be like a lot of municipal labs that do just 1 or 2 methods. They have 2 or 3 analysts. That's a small lab. But again, it just depends on the number of methods, number of samples, number of analysts. I should give you a better answer. Also, California used to have a position called the principal analyst. That's going away in terms of the requirements for what that is. Laboratories are free to keep that if they'd like, but it's up to the laboratory to define what that is, what experience, what educational requirements have to be, or they can move it all together. Depends on the organization of your lab. If you have, let's say, an organic section, you might have an organic supervisor. Then you might have 4 or 5 analysts running, you know, volatiles, SVOCs, etc. It depends on the flow of what your laboratory needs for data. You know, with that many analysts, if you have 5 or 6 analysts, you should have a supervisor to be able to just monitor how they're doing, reviewing data, etc. Depends on your scope of your laboratory. 5.3, environmental conditions, has to do with facilities. The main findings I see on this one are incompatible tests being run together. If your organics room has SVOCs and VOCs together, that's not going to work. You know methylene chloride contamination. If your laboratory stores, let's say, microorganisms, positive, negative controls with your samples, that's not really allowed. And this section of the standard goes through in terms of how you should separate out methods, separate out space, make sure each method has enough space. I know some methods themselves require like, you know, so many square feet of bench area for micro, for instance, and that'd be located in this section. 5.4 to 5.6, method requirements. 5.4 is a difficult one. As you lab people know, method validation, method generation is a difficult process. There are several layers which you have to go through, right? First look at the method, look at method requirements. Then you look at the standard, what's required in the standard. Then look at your state regulations. Then you look at EPA regulations, right? Because there's certain drinking water methods that require certain things. And it's multi-layered, and it's very complicated. That is a hard process to do. The quality manager, along with the technical manager, should go through those, make sure they'll all be taken care of. Some methods are written better than others. I know the Hawk TNT methods are fairly newish, and their methods don't necessarily capture all the required quality control. So if you look at just the TNT method itself, for instance, you follow it, it's not sufficient. Most states, most ABs will require, a lot of these Hawk methods are not EPA approved methods, they're equivalent methods or accepted methods. Therefore, you have to look at the underlying method. So if you're in an ammonia TNT method, you must look at the 350.1 EPA version or the 4500 standard method version to make sure the quality control aspects are included in your SOP. It's kind of messy, very difficult to do, to understand. That's a place that a lot of findings come from, is the SOP does not contain all of the requirements that are needed. 5.5, calibration requirements. This goes for instrument calibration. as well as support equipment calibration. Everything from running a GCMS initial calibration to how often do you have to verify your pipettes. Okay. It's all in 5.5. And again, this is an area where a lot of findings will be. Quarters get missed. Some things are annual. Some instrument calibration is done daily. Some is just when your CCV or ICV stops getting good response. Things like that. Traceability. So all of our data must be traceable to an NIST standard. That's why we keep our C of A's, right? A little note on that is the standard says that C of A's must be readily available. That doesn't mean you must have a hard copy of all your C of A's in some binder. I know a lot of vendors nowadays don't even provide you one when they ship you the reagent or the standard. But it must be readily available, which means if you're able to go onto the website, look at the lot number, and pull the C of A, that works. If I do an assessment, let's say it's a 3-day assessment, and on day 1, I ask for a C of A, and on day 3, still don't have it, that's not really available. So that's a tricky one for labs to manage because some are given hard copies, some aren't. Who's in charge of pulling them? How are you gonna trace them? That's just one area that's often overlooked. Also, measuring traceability has to do with balance calibrations, right? Weights, things like that. Are they done annually? Who's in charge of that? Do you have the verification, etc.? Sampling and handling of samples and test items. Let's do samples. To me, sampling is the most important aspect of everything we do. It's often the one that has the least amount of focus on it because a lot of labs don't sample. They just accept samples. Some labs do sample. It's very important. If a sample is taken at the wrong location with the wrong ID on it, then the whole process from there on to the report writing is not helpful. It's not accurate. It's the wrong location. If a sample is pulled as a composite instead of a grab, the rest of the process doesn't really matter. So sampling is very important. The requirements in the standard for the laboratory are to have a sampling plan. And your sampling plan can be, we don't sample. That's it, right? You receive samples from the clients, etc. And some have very extensive sampling plans. Lab personnel themselves will go out and take samples. And that should be more well written out in the SOP. And then, of course, handling samples and test items. This, when it comes in the door, how are they being checked? Is there records of receiving? Are they being uniquely identified? Are the samples being stored correctly? Is it freezer? Is it fridge? etc. So that should all be spelled out in your SOP. Also, the standard requires a sample acceptance policy. This is something that, in theory, could be given to a client if they ask a question, like, hey, I want to drop off some samples for testing. Sure, here you go. And then you give you can hand it to them and say, here's our requirements. Yes, and someone pointed out that yes, sampling does provide the biggest contribution to overall uncertainty of a result. That is true. Uncertainty is spoken of in the standard, again, because it's based off the ISO method, ISO standard. And sampling does give you a lot of uncertainty. And one way labs can sort of dial into this is they do duplicates, right? You do a sample duplicate and look at the precision. And that gives you some indication of uncertainty. Thanks for bringing that up. 5.9 in this section is very basic. What it basically says is, if you're doing chemical testing or micro testing, refer to that module. Because module 4, module 5 for chemistry and micro goes into more in depth in terms of required QC. 5.9 is basically, if for some reason your methods don't fall under those modules, do some basic positive negative controls, do some blanks. Very basic, but this should be covered in the modules of the testing you're doing. Reporting the results. Again, every lab is different. If you are a captive lab and your only client is the plant, you might not even write a report. It's just a database where results get put in, and then your client has access to the database. That's fine, as long as the requirements and standards are met. For instance, if you have a BOD, and let's say you have a blink failure, do you communicate that to your client? If it's just the value itself put into the spreadsheet, it's not sufficient. The client has to know, like we said, data of known quality, so qualifications, narratives, flags, that has to be communicated somehow. So 510 kind of goes into requirements in terms of, and if you do issue a specific report, there are things dealing with logos, address of the laboratory, who signed it, the signature on file. Amended reports is a big issue. When I do audits, I talk about amended reports. This is one area where a lab's kind of like, we should kind of fix a report and send it back out again. Requirement is the amended report has to refer to the one it replaced, has to have unique ID, things like that. So reporting can get kind of tricky, since every lab has their own report format. Okay, that's the overview of the 2016 standard. And again, every one of those sections has lots of changes from 2009 to 2016 standard. Future modules will go over what those changes are, what it means for your laboratory, but that's just a basic overview. So any questions about that, maybe I can answer them, or we can address that at a future time. Let's talk about how to prepare for implementation of the 2016 standard. First and foremost, talk to your AB. IES is there to help you with questions you might have to the process. Talk to ELAP. See what needs to be done and when. A lot of labs are afraid to talk to their ABs because they think the less communication, the better. Forget about us, let's do our own thing. It's actually not better in the long run. It's better to have that communication open, talk about what's required, what's changing. At this time, a lot of things, like I said, are in flux. The more about timeline, the better off you are. You should become familiar with the 2016 standard. I said, becoming proficient with requirements and regulations optimal, not optional. Different things. You have to understand what we're going to do. So the next step would be read the standard, read the California regulations. Before you make any changes, you have to understand what you're doing. Okay, what is happening? This should involve all managers and the QA manager at this point. Which modules are applicable to what you're doing? Terms and conditions, or terms and definitions in the standard are very helpful. In fact, I'll say this, it's in section 3, module 2, there's a list of definitions. And we like to think we know what everything means, but words actually mean something. And when you're being assessed, there's a finding. Sometimes it comes down to the definition of a word, because the lab thought it was different than what the AB thought it was. Things like a procedure. What is a procedure? When it comes to a method, that's pretty easy, right? Oh, we have an SOP, we know how to run, TKN. But what's the procedure for internal audits? Is it a one-line sentence in your quality manual that says we will do these once a year? That's not really a procedure. That's more of a policy, right? Our policy is to perform internal audits every year. Great. What's the actual procedure? What is a batch? Depends. It's on the method. Depends on your laboratory operations. Is it for process control? Might be different than a regulatory batch. Batches do matter, especially when it comes to method. It says you must do this once per batch, being an end of a batch. If you're running let's say you're running volatiles, and you're busy, and that machine is on 24 hours a day, right? It does matter what the start and what the end is of a batch. Could be time-based, could be the number of samples based. It is important. Quality system matrix. Okay, these are just some examples. Is it drinking water? That's pretty straightforward. Is it wastewater? I don't know. Non-potable. Is it wastewater? Is it stormwater? Is it a sludge? Is it a mix? I know a lot of labs get samples and they don't know what it is and where it came from. But it's important to know what matrix, how the lab defines the matrix to define what method it's going to use, how it's going to be reported, etc. Quality manual sounds, again, pretty straightforward. There actually are many requirements that must be found in the quality manual. And the standard goes through and says, the quality manual must contain or reference. Let me talk on that for a minute. So some laboratories' quality manuals are big. They include everything. Anything quality system is in there. A lot of laboratories' quality manuals are very small. because they reference things. On this section for training, they say training, CSOP number, blah, blah, blah for training. And then you go to the SOP and the information's there, and that's fine too. There is no simple answer for everyone in terms of what the best way to do it is. Every lab's different. I would tell you the one extreme, trying to put everything in the quality manual, is some things change often. I've seen quality manuals where they put the equipment list in there. Well, when you buy a new IC, you have to update your quality manual. I think that seems kind of onerous. I would say equipment list, please see Appendix A or SOP, whatever, and that can change without changing the whole quality manual. Anyway, that section defines what needs to be in the quality manual. And there are many, many other definitions. Some definitions are vague. For instance, what does annual mean? Every conference this comes up. What does annual mean? Is it once per calendar year? Is it every 12 months? You know, if something needs to be done annually, let's say an audit, you do it on December 31st, and you do another audit on January 1st. Is that done annually versus every 12 months? If it's every 12 months, what if it's 12 and a half months? Did you adhere to that? What if it's 11 and a half months, etc.? So there is no simple answer to that. I wish there was. And again, and most ABs are saying, from my perspective, most ABs are saying, let the lab define what annual is, or monthly, or quarterly, and is it technically justified? What it comes down to, does it make sense? Can we justify it? And are they doing it, right? So anyway, and again, read the methods again. I know we're changing the standard. Okay, the standard's changing, or standard's being implemented. It actually does affect method SOPs. Okay, we like to think methods are separate. They kind of aren't. Like I said, the modules, the QC found in the modules will affect the methods that are being used. Develop a transition plan. The more time you spend on this step, the better off you'll be. I know there's a sense that we start changing things, start updating the quality manual, start updating our, training files, and that's fine. But I would say take a little bit of time and just develop a plan. I recommend a gap analysis, okay? You have to know where you're at now and what is required in the future. Find what is the difference between those things. If you use the right checklist, if you use like a 2016 checklist to start with, you can get an ELAP checklist, you can make your own, and try to kind of see where we're at, where do we need to be. My advice would be, and this is what I tell my clients, is kind of two birds with one stone, is they'll hire me to come in to do an internal audit for them. Because again, internal audit doesn't mean it has to be done by the laboratory. It just has to be done not externally, not from you can't count a client audit or an AB audit as an internal audit. It has to be done itself. So they'll hire me to come in. I will do their internal audit for them, and at the same time, do the gap analysis, right? And it kind of gives them a sense of where they're at and what needs to change before the 2016 can be fully implemented. Got a little note here. Yeah, so most ABs accept the definition of not later than 12 months. That's the last one. And I would say that is definitely true. If you're over 12 months, it's hard to argue annual, for sure. You can't say, oh, I did it in the beginning of 2017. I did it at the end of 2018. Not really annual. But that's a good point. Thank you. All right, so for the transition plan, who is taking the lead? What is the plan? What things need to be planned? And what are the details? Let's go over that. And again, you know your system best. There's no two identical labs. They're all different. You as a quality manager, you as laboratory director, you as supervisor, you know your system. These questions can be answered by you and probably not anyone but you to start with. Who's taking the lead? It's important to assign specific personnel. This kind of, when you have a meeting with your key personnel in the lab, you say, we are going to review the quality manual. You can't leave it there. You got to say, so-and-so, person A is going to do it. Person B is going to assist something. You need to assign, otherwise it doesn't get done. And we all know this, if you're not personally responsible for something, if everyone's responsible, then no one is. So assign tasks to people. You've heard inspect what you expect. So once you assign these tasks, there has to be a follow-up, set some timelines. So who did it, and then did it get done? Is the same person reviewing what was written? I know a lot of labs don't have the resources to, usually do. If there's more than one person in the lab, usually you have someone else look at it. A lot of small labs or one-person labs, they have to review it themselves, and that's okay. You should have a procedure in place in terms of the review. Like once it's written, wait 2 or 3 days and then go back and read it. When you read what you wrote before, you often find things you didn't find in the moment. Obviously, there's some fresh eyes on there. What is the plan? Set target dates. Get with ELAP, go with the AB, and know when the process is happening. Okay, when should we have our quality manual revised by? When should we have our technical methods revised by? When should we plan our internal audit? When should we do our management review? Set realistic target dates. And again, realistic. Again, quality systems it's a huge process. And day-to-day operations are difficult. So keep that in mind. Know that you have to operate your lab while you're trying to transition as well. Those things do come up. What is the flow? These last couple steps are kind of interchangeable. We'll talk about the flow of work. But what is the flow? Are you going to make the changes to the SOP now? Implement those changes on the bench? Are you going to wait until the quality manual is done first? And are you going to do internal audit first before you start changing methods? Figure out what flow works best for you. And what are the priorities? Is your quality manual a mess? Is it just like a holdover from the 90s? That be totally redone? Is your priorities getting credit in the first place? Are you a new laboratory? Etc. What things need to be planned? What is the structure of the laboratory? Who is the quality manager? Are they separate from the technical manager? Do they have dual roles? Who's supervisor? Figure out how the structure of your lab is going to be. And again, create a time for implementation. When will training happen? Okay. My personal opinion is to have key players in place, deciding the big ideas, making the big changes. And once that's all settled, then we can train staff on what the changes were. Demonstration of capability. When's that going to happen? There are some requirements in there need to be fulfilled. Again, internal audits and reviews, procedures. What order are we going to do things? What are the details? So we need to assure that all requirements, like I said before, are included or referenced. You'd be surprised when I do audits, some major items are missing from the quality manual. Training, for instance. There's no training section in the quality manual, which first of all needs to be there, at least in terms of referencing somewhere else. And they go, oh, this is what we do. And they go through what they do to train someone, which sounds great, right? They might have checklists in place. They might have supervisors signing things off. But if it's not a procedure, then it's a finding. You have to follow what you're doing. And then what goes directly into the quality manual versus an SOP, it's up for you to decide. If it's very in-depth, if it changes often, I would say make it separate from the quality manual. And then even though the TNI standard has its own terms and definitions, the quality manual must have it as well, or reference it. A lot of labs might call, for instance, an LCS versus a BS versus an LFB. It doesn't really matter. Is it a laboratory control sample? You call it a blank spike, laboratory fortified blank. They're all the same quality control sample. But how does the lab define it? And when I go assess, I have no preconceived notion of what they call anything. So when I look at the batch, I go, what is this? What is this? And they call it a certain thing. They call it a low-level spike. They call it a internal standard check. Really, it's an ICV. It doesn't matter. As long as you have the definitions somewhere. So everyone's on the same page. I can't say this enough, but do SOPs accurately describe actual laboratory practice? A lot of times, findings stem from the way they are doing it is right and it's perfect. But the SOP doesn't say that. They're going off SOP to perform the method, but yet they're doing it correctly. That's still a finding. Even though you're performing the method correctly, it can still be a finding because you did not follow your SOP. And in that case, you'd want to update your SOP to reflect what's actually going on. A lot of times, SOPs are written incorrectly and they're being followed correctly. That's a different finding. You are following the SOP, good job, but we need to fix the SOP. There's some missing requirements, incorrect requirements, things like that. And this is where your internal audit comes into effect. You know, when you're doing it, and I know it's difficult, you know, in the lab, when I had my laboratory, I was there every day. I did not see things other people saw. It's in my face every day. It's familiar. I can't see what's wrong. Internal audits, try and come with a fresh set of eyes. If you can get actual fresh set of eyes, that's great, an outside person. But just go to your analyst, say, run this, you know, let's talk through this. How do you do this? And you'd be surprised how many times analysts who are very efficient, okay, might find a better way to do things or a quicker way to do things, but it's not in the SOP. So again, big type, big font, red, exclamation. Make sure you describe actual laboratory practice. All right, so training of staff. So this, usually the quality manager takes the lead on this. Once it's all, the plan's been made, the next two steps, okay, the training of the staff and the updating the manual, that's gonna kind of go back and forth. That's part of your plan. It says here, all staff members influence quality system. It's true. I know analysts think the quality manager sets the rules and they follow it, but actually all staff members influence quality system. If your QA manager says, do it this way, you say, nah, I'm gonna do it this way, then you are influencing the system, okay? So everyone's on board, everyone has to be on board. Everyone has to follow the same rules. And again, record all training events. So when this training occurs, when you're doing like let's say a all hands laboratory training meeting, you want to record that happened. I will go to labs and ask how their training goes, and they say, oh, we have monthly meetings. Oh, cool, let me see the records. Oh, it's just informal. You know, it didn't happen, right? So it has to be recorded. These are great opportunities, again, for preventative actions. Training events should be recorded. This last step, update quality management system and technical requirements. So for me, these two can be interchangeable. You can update the system first and then train, okay? But some training of management has to happen as well for this to happen. So this depends on your laboratory, which is better. I know some labs like to develop a plan, then they update the quality manual SOPs, and then they train everybody, and that works too. That's not your setup. But usually this is back and forth. There'll be changes made, there'll be training. Oh wait, we forgot this. Update another manual, etc. So this is kind of interchangeable. But review and revise existing quality management system documents. Again, if you did a gap analysis, you would see what new requirements are needed, and you would fix those as you go along. But the end part is kind of messy, but it doesn't have to be if we plan a little better. Let me talk about documents versus records real quick, because it's kind of my little side pet peeve. But documents are things that tell you how to do something, right? So your quality manual says, here's where we're gonna do things. SOP say, here's how we're gonna do it. And I put on here forms and bench sheets only when forms and bench sheets tell you how to do something. So a lot of bench sheets will say, you know, they're very prescriptive and they'll say, add this, do this, and you write down the actual amounts that goes along. That's actually a document. Okay? A document tells you how to do things. Records are just a record of something happening. And I know it gets confusing because the 2016 standard and the ISO standard, they use it interchangeably sometimes, where it says, make sure to document what happened. What it means is make sure you record what happened. Okay? They're kind of separate, but it does matter. If you have a bench sheet and all it contains is actual data, you know, weights, volumes, absorbance, standard IDs, whatever, that's not a document. That's a record, and they're handled differently because documents must be reviewed periodically. People sometimes see that and say, oh, documents, that's my quality manual and my SOPs. That's all my documents are. Okay, but if your bench sheet tells you what to do, well, then you might change the SOP. You didn't change the bench sheet to reflect that, and it's wrong. Okay, so I just have to say that. I say it whenever I can to anyone who will listen. Documents versus records, they are handled differently, and they should be treated differently. Actually, records aren't part of your document management system, right? Because records aren't revised. Records are not updated. You can print off 1 million copies of a bench sheet. send it across the world, and it won't matter. You can't print off 100 copies of your quality manual and send it around without tracking it. Okay, so they're treated very differently. So it's important we get that little difference. And lastly is, if you haven't already, you need to get accredited. Okay, can't make that point strong enough. So that's the implementation process. That's the overview. What questions do you have? I know this was a general overview of a lot of things. I know there's a lot of specific questions. A lot of those will be answered in future modules in terms of changes in incorporating the 2016 standard. Are there any questions, just big picture, or whatever you might have? Now is the time. I'm gonna give it a few seconds in case anybody is typing something out on the chat. I can see. You can always unmute and talk if you'd like. Data exists today that proves accredited labs. Oh, that's a good point. Thanks, Ned. So data exists today that proves that accredited labs produce more precise, technically valid results. That is absolutely true. There are a lot of labs who are not accredited because they only do things like process control or internal research, things like that. And I know this. I used to do research, just basic research, like for my postdoc, for instance. There was no QC. Like, if I was lucky, I'd throw in a positive control and call it good. Yeah, labs that are accredited, held to a standard, do provide technically valid results. That is definitely true. There's a lot of benefits that come with being accredited, and it's not just the quality of the data. It's also clients can find you because regulatory agencies say, you know, it must be done by an accredited laboratory. Well, there you go. If you're not accredited, you can't do that work. Initial recordings question. If scanned and stored electronically, do you need to keep the original data sheet? The short answer to that is no. The 2016 standard does not differentiate between electronic copies and hard copies. It just talks about records in general. So it's up to the laboratory to decide, what do you want to save? What do you want to scan? Now the caveat to that is you must make sure your electronic copies are controlled, meaning backed up, accessible. You know, we know how computers work, we know how servers work. Just make sure it's backed up, preferably offsite, maybe to the cloud, but they have to be accessible. Just like you have to make sure, you know, your archive room doesn't catch on fire, make sure your server is able to handle all the data. So no, there's no difference between hard copies and scanned. I know we have a tendency to keep hard copies after we scan them because it makes us nervous, and that might be a good, you know, fail safe, but not required. Is there software available for gap analysis implementation process? I wish there was. There are. That's a maybe. There's some software out there that helps, but from what a lot of the software out there is generic to the standard, and the standard again is written vague enough to where labs can make their procedures fit their laboratory. So there's no software out there that's for your laboratory specifically. There is software out there that can do like general, you know, there are checklists available, for instance. You can get an Excel checklist for the 2016 standard, but how it applies to your laboratory itself has to be probably a person looking at it to make sure it's being fulfilled. Examples of non-conformances. That's a good question. So non-conformance is any deviation from the standard, from your SOP, from the method. That's what non-conformance is. Okay, it's a deviation from that. Now that is a lot of things. That could be like an out of range LCS, like an out of range standard recovery, or it can be something's wrong with the way you do management reviews. Okay, it covers everything. Now, my philosophy is there are things that are called corrections and things that are corrective actions. If something is small, like let's say you're reviewing data, and you see someone obliterate an entry and write in the correct amount, or the correct value, without initially dating, okay? That's wrong for several reasons. To me, that's a correction. I'd go to the analyst and say, hey, remember line through, initial date? They go, oh yeah. If I saw that same analyst do that 16 times, now it's a corrective action. Okay? It's beyond a simple correction. And there is no black and white answer to that. But like I said before, if something goes beyond your SOP or beyond your quality manual, because your SOP and quality manual should have things in there that say, if this happens, do this. Okay, once you're past that, once you tried those things, didn't work, definitely corrective action. Okay, let's see. Get my laser pointer. I can manage chat. Okay. Is a CWEA lab analyst license and approved license to be technical manager? Good question. I don't know that answer. I don't know, Jacob, if you could speak to that. I'm not familiar with exactly what is required to get that license.
Are you reading the question in the chat box?
Yeah.
Okay,
Is a CWEA lab analyst license and approved license to be technical manager?
Depends on the grade. Based on if it's a grade 1, then that would correspond to you would be allowed to run certain methods that would correlate with that grade level. Let me just verify real quick to make sure that the CWA lab analyst is approved, and then I can provide that confirmation if you don't mind waiting 1 second.
Cool. Thanks, Jacob. Appreciate that. The next question, how does TNI plan to hold labs to ISO 17025-2005 when ILAC could require all accredited labs certified 2017 edition? That's a good question. So accreditation is done per standard. So some laboratories are accredited just for 17025, and if so, they'll be held to 2017 edition. If labs are held to just TNI accreditation, it is my understanding they are not held to the 2017 edition. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that chat was private. Sorry. Let me want to copy paste that, or maybe I can. Let's see if I can do that.
And Patrick, while you're doing that, I can respond to the CWA question.
Perfect. Go ahead.
So yes, if you do hold a valid CWA laboratory analyst certification, that shall be deemed to meet the qualifications of the technical manager if the grade of certification has educational and experience requirements that are appropriate to the scope of testing in the facility's laboratory. And then the regulations include a table which is a crosswalk showing the grades of certification, and then what types of tests or what kind of training or experience you can run in that laboratory. Apologize for the background noise.
Work from home.
Yeah.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I hope that clarified it pretty well. If not, and there's still more questions on that, I can try to explain more.
Yeah, Jacob. So there are questions coming in terms of where do you find the minimum qualifications or credentials for technical manager. You can pull up that section of the regulations. That would be, maybe that's it. I'm not sure. Brooke sent that, which I appreciate. Let's see what else.
Okay, yeah, the section of the regulations, and this is the proposed regulations. It would be section 64812.00, laboratory personnel.
Perfect. Everyone got that?
I can add it to the
chat section. That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. Yeah. So technical manager is a very, like I said before, it's a hot button thing. What's required and who is and who isn't, it's a hard thing. There's a specific question above. How do you bypass the heating and cooling cycle of TSS and standard methods? If you do, how do you document your SOP and still be compliant to the test method? I see this one all the time. The short answer is TSS is a method-defined parameter, so there are no deviations allowed. Okay, that's the short answer. you can't deviate from the TSS method. That being said, I've seen ABs approve deviations. For instance, the standard method for TSS says that to take your sample, you must put it on a stir plate and stir it. Use a wide bore pipette and extract from the middle. Like, nobody does that, right? And I think the EPA actually came with a memo saying, yeah, it's okay to use graduated cylinder, whatever. So deviations do occur. I have seen ABs accept deviations for skipping heating and a second drying cycle, for instance. But it has to be technically justified. Okay. Now again, the short answer is no deviation. So AB can say no, you can't do it. You know, if you get assessed and you're doing it, they can say no. Depends on the state and who it's for. But if you have routine samples that are the same every day from like a municipal plant, and they're very well characterized, you do a study showing that doing 2 cycles versus 1 cycle is equivalent, a lot of ABs will accept that. You have to have it recorded, you have to have the study on file, etc., to show that it works. I hope that answers your question. Does EPA method update rules trump California MURs? I'm going to go on a limb and say that regulations usually don't cancel out each other. They're normally additive. So if EPA says you must do A, B, and C, and California says you must do A, B, and C, I should say X, Y, Z, then you must do A, B, C, and X, Y, Z. Usually additive. There are some instances where they are in conflict, and then that's a problem. But like I said before, when it comes to methods, you have the method itself, your SOP, you have TNI, and then you have EPA rules, right? Like drinking water, or I'm glad you wrote up the method update rule. So 2017 method update rule talks about new MDLs. Those are in effect right now. And there are a lot of labs who are not doing it. Okay, it went into effect a while ago. That's an example of where, in fact, the 2016 standard does speak to that now. But that 2017 MUR went into effect before the 2016 standard did for most states. So labs had to follow the EPA method update rule, even though it wasn't in the standard yet. It's a great question. So hopefully that answers your question. Lab have more than 1 technical managers? Yes. I mentioned that before, but yeah, I would note that. I would say anyone in a lab who has a qualification for technical manager should be listed as technical manager with the appropriate qualifications, you know, submit your AB, etc. It just makes life a lot easier. Technical managers leave or they're gone for a while. It's just so much easier to have it already in place. So yes, you can have more than 1 technical manager.
Patrick, this is Jacob. I'd like to just make one clarification on the question about the CWA certificates. I just want to clarify that is related to employees who are part of a drinking water or wastewater treatment facility.
Good point. What you're saying is an analyst at a commercial lab can't get CWA certification and become technical manager.
Correct.
Yeah, must be employed by a drinking water wastewater plant.
That's correct.
Any more questions coming in? All right, well, be here for a second if you don't. But anyway, here's my name, contact information. If you have any specific questions about anything we've talked about, contact me via email or phone. Here's a question. Will we be able to view this webinar again? I think so. I think IES is going to make it available. Patrick can speak to that.
I'll do that.
Perfect. Yeah, so it'll be available. So you can see it again. There you go.
Okay, so it looks.
Questions? Sorry, I was going to say, if you have any questions about accreditation, contact IES directly. I don't know, Patrick, if someone particular they should contact specifically, or just Ned can talk to that maybe? Oh,
yes, thank you very much, Tony. It's Ned Gravel here again. On the chat window, you should be able to see Duncan Miller's phone number and his email address. And he's with the IAS Customer Success Team. And he will take any questions you may have. As well, we will be taking this webinar, recorded most of it. I may ask Tony to go over the beginning bits again, turn it into a video with voiceovers on the slides only, and we will be publishing it on our website. As well, we're going to have a slide in that video that has the contact information that you may need. I'd like to thank Tony and all the participants for your participation in this webinar. Being a professional educator, I would like to see more actual discussion without having to use the chat room, but that's where the technology is today, so we're going to try and live with that. We will be having more webinars, and the next one will be announced relatively soon. In the interim, if you have any questions, you can send them to Duncan at dmiller@iasonline.org with respect to the training, and you can send it to me at info@iastraining. training@iasonline.org. And with respect to the slides, we will be sending out the slides to everyone for the email addresses we have. It'll be in a PDF format. And if you have any other questions with respect to the training or the issue or what we're trying to do here, please let us know. And other than that, thanks everyone for their participation. So does anyone have any questions?
Hey, Ned, Patrick here. Are we going to be providing some kind of certificate of attendance for this course?
Julie and I are working on that now. We have the people that actually signed up on the registration page, and we'll be sending out certificates to those people. They will be certificates of participation because there's no knowledge uptake requirements for this training. And it's just a matter of allowing the lab to document that they participated in a session on the new standard. Does that answer the question?
Yes, Ned, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And I'm glad you were able to participate in this. I'm told there's going to be 2 or 3 more. And of course, Tony will be delivering them. And we'll have more experience. Have a pleasant day and stay safe.
Thanks, Ned.
Thank you, everybody.